it takes on the question of how do you deal with self-representation if you're trying to make something for yourself, which is what this panel is about, in terms of art spaces. How can you plan, because as we've seen, a lot of the initiatives and a lot of the traction these initiatives have is because they're actually spontaneous, and their agendas emerge through them and within them, rather than being something which is out there, which happens to be the main difference with institutional frameworks, where agendas are actually a matter of policy, a matter of discussion, a matter of planning. So this is a very edited version of the performance. So I tried to cut it down into focusing how a piece of architecture can maybe foster an agenda. The piece originally talks a little bit in broader terms and in other terms, but for reasons of time we have to cut it down. So it's called Towards the Zoology of Art Spaces.
Do you want the lights on?
You need it?
You don't need the projection, right?
Yeah, we do that.
Slides, but
Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
We're Hunter and Gatherer, and we're very pleased to be here at CalArts talking about art spaces. In our practice so far, we've been attempting to understand art spaces as a two-way intersection of ideas and buildings, of ambition and reality, and at all times a matter of life and death, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. Though to define life or death, that mysterious exchange or non-exchange of vital artistic energies, that is a rather grandiose mission. So for today's lecture, let us symbolically commit ourselves to a more zoological approach that takes for granted life and death and focuses instead on the classification of different species of art spaces.
Exactly. You could also call them arts habitats, highly complex chemical concoctions, a set of infinitely intertwined chain reactions that connect single strands of art space DNA with a global ecology of all art spaces everywhere interacting with each other.
It would obviously be impossible to fully and adequately represent the DNA of even a single art space, or to understand it by means of a simple scientific formula. Yet some species of art spaces do stand out and call for our special attention.
Art spaces that seem to sport a more ambitious sense of purpose than others. They too may not possess or work by a scientific formula, or command the necessary means for genetic manipulation, but at the very least they adhere to what we zoologists call an agenda.
Exactly, an agenda, a sort of program.
Program or philosophy.
Or policy.
Or ideology.
Or some simply call it just an attitude.
Maybe related to self-determination.
You could just call it sincerity.
Some call it marketing.
And some call it performativity.
Others like to call it strategy.
But for tonight, let's call it agenda. But what exactly is an art space agenda?
I would say that an art space agenda in many cases stands for an articulation, an accumulation, or even a post-rationalization of past practice. It is simply the sum of what has been and still is being done. The sum of all exhibitions, performances, problems, policies, and so on. Rather than being pure products of the mind or formulaic self-imposed concept, an art space agenda is like a good wine. The result of a natural and long experimenting maturing process.
Yet agendas often serve a specific purpose and can be consciously crafted, formulated, or designed to meet that purpose. Even if that purpose might be open-ended or indeed oceanic in terms of its scope.
Agendas might be an attempt to match ideals on one hand and practical possibilities and considerations on the other hand. An agenda is what results from asking ourselves, what do we want to achieve and how do we achieve it?
In that sense, thinking about an art space agenda is analogous to thinking about a building, a building built to facilitate certain activities rather than others.
Indeed, an art space agenda in the architecturally embodied sense we are talking about here is certainly more poetic than pragmatic. It might refer to something that envelops us from without and within, something to appropriate and to be appropriated by, and to live in as if in a building.
For example, we recently undertook a zoological expedition to PAF, the Performing Arts Forum. The Performing Arts Forum is near Reims in northern France. It turned out to be a 19th century convent in an idyllic rural setting, which became an art space in the year 2000 when renowned theatre director Jan Ritzema put down his entire life savings, effectively purchasing a wreck, a living ruin.
PAF was eventually open to all artists who wished to live and work there. Yet Mr. Ritzema committed it to a very strong agenda, very defined, of collaboration, sharing, and exchange, and the foundations of artistic practice. At PAF there exists only one rule, to make things possible for each other.
Though, in practice, we found this rule is always understood as a non-rule, and the agenda as a non-agenda. PAF is driven by a sense of the collective, yet the collective is a self-organizing, open organism. Within Ritzema's framework, it's defined by the synergies and confrontations between different individuals and groups, randomly meeting and interacting at different points in space and time within the building.
What goes on in PAF is indeed just the result of accumulated practice, an expression of the fact that it was bought in an impulsive rush with a lot of courage and no specific plan.
No plan of what was going to happen in a 5-story building comprising hundreds of rooms, a courtyard, communal areas, and even an integrated chapel. Mr. Ritzema just bought it, spent time in it with friends or thinking alone. What shall I do? What can we do with this incredible place?
After an entire year of conversation and speculation inside the empty ruin, there emerged an idea to use the space for artistic explorations, a sort of artistic residence in which guests share their art, their theory, their politics, in a collective practice, critically engaging with each other in a spirit of solidarity and exchange.
Something like a pragmatist's commune or sect.
And like any other sect, one of its principal resources is a particular place and building, supporting and energizing a specific set of dynamics and behaviors.
The agenda may be wide open, but so is the monastic architecture of the ex-convent that is PAF. Endless space and huge dining halls, circulating staircases and corridors, amidst more than 100 individual cells, allow individual and collective creativity to coexist and intermesh.
Monastic cells for individual thought and creative seclusions. Corridors wide as rooms facilitating random user interactions. Interactions that peak at particular points of the building, such as large halls transformed into studios for anyone and everyone, for ad hoc meetings, tutorials, critiques, and sociabilities.
A courtyard providing sheltered outdoor space, inviting large-scale events or simply recreation.
3 massive staircases strategically located at different points of access, so that there are always ways to meet or avoid each other.
It's as if there are arteries infusing the building, distributing the energy wherever it needs to go with silent efficiency.
So PAF certainly exemplifies how architecture can really allow an agenda to evolve, substantiating it like flesh on a bone.
We asked ourselves, and still do ask ourselves, whether one can deliberately brew these ingredients, whether an art space with an experimental agenda can be instigated just by willing it and planning it.
In a sense, to think of PAF is to think of an island of the blessed, a utopia, a nowhere land.
But how could such an agenda flourish in an urban centre like Los Angeles? Amidst the economic frenzy, lack of time, space and money, and a voracious property development industry, how could an art space embody something else than the external pressures that shape it?
Some view this as an invitation to take a more activistic stance, to get in the way of logic of the logic of market dynamics, to involve the neighborhood, to test shared ownership, the legal or illegal way, or to mix the artist's charitable economy with a different type of financial autonomy. It may require attracting a more profitable, non-art audience.
Hence constituting a test of moral and artistic flexibility.
Equality of dissent, a tipping point when survival and resistance might one day or any minute just now open out onto a wider sense of purpose.
Or purposeless experimentation or fermentation at the scale of an artist, a room, a warehouse, a city, a country, or an entire ecology.
So finally, let us reassure the audience. Agendas can make a difference whenever, wherever, and however they come into being. They are living beings, as likely to be born from affluence as from starvation.
Let us then all be zoologists, in that we seek to honestly understand and experiment with the complexities of different artistic habitats, their evolutions and their vocations, and to see ourselves not as being academically without, but to understand ourselves as being deeply within.
Whereas this, for now, was just a performance, a ritualistic examination of what is perhaps possible, perhaps impossible. Between me and you, just one more visit to the zoo.
Thank you.